The California sun was just beginning to rise over the Naval Special Warfare Training Center in Coronado when the transport truck rolled in, kicking up a haze of golden dust. The air smelled of salt, sweat, and iron, the scent of pressure and purpose. Dozens of recruits stood shoulder to shoulder in perfect formation, their uniforms crisp, their faces already set with the hardened expressions of men ready to prove something. And then she stepped out. Lieutenant Emily Carter. Her boots hit the gravel with the kind of calm authority that made heads turn, but not in welcome. The conversations that had filled the air moments earlier died out, leaving behind only the sound of gulls overhead and the faint crash of waves beyond the base fence. "Is that her?" someone muttered under his breath. Emily adjusted her pack, ignoring the murmurs. The sun caught the edges of her brown hair, pulled tight into a regulation bun, glinting against the faint sheen of sweat already gathering along her neck. She could feel their stares, the disbelief, the skepticism, the quiet resentment. In a squad built on muscle, endurance, and silent competition, she was the anomaly. The first woman assigned to a SEAL candidate unit in that cycle. An experiment, some said. A mistake, others whispered. A symbol she feared. The instructor, Chief Petty Officer Reynolds, stepped forward, his voice sharp and gravelly. "Listen up, candidates. You're not here to play soldier. You're here to break, rebuild, and survive. Most of you won't. The ocean will eat you alive. The sand will grind you down. And if it's not the water or the pain that gets you, it'll be your mind." He stopped right in front of Emily, his shadow stretching across her boots. "That includes everyone." A pause. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth before he turned away. The group erupted into motion, and training began. The first few days blurred into a storm of exhaustion. Endless push-ups on burning asphalt, log carries through freezing surf, and runs so long that daylight turned into darkness before they ended. Emily kept to herself. She didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't complain, didn't ask for help. She simply followed every order to precision, every sprint, every crawl, every shouted command. But her silence made her invisible. During mealtime, she sat alone at the end of the long mess table, picking at rations while the men laughed at inside jokes she wasn't part of. Her presence was acknowledged only through sidelong glances and the occasional muttered remark, "Probably here for PR," or "Bet she's gone by week 2. When it came time for team drills, she was the last one chosen. When they paired up for buddy carries, she was often left standing until the instructors forced someone to take her. It wasn't hatred, it was dismissal. A quiet, cutting indifference that said, "You don't belong here." But Emily didn't need their acceptance. She'd been preparing for this moment her whole life. Her father, Colonel James Carter, had raised her on discipline. As a retired Marine sniper, he'd believed in precision over power, focus over noise. When other kids were playing video games, Emily was in the backyard, learning to disassemble a rifle blindfolded. He used to tell her, "If you ever want to lead men, Emmy, you'll have to outwork them. Not by a little, by a mile." Now, standing knee-deep in icy surf with 50-pound sandbags over her shoulders, she could almost hear his voice again, faint but firm. Her muscles screamed. Her hands trembled. But she didn't fall. By the end of week 1, 6 recruits had quit. 1 had collapsed from dehydration. The rest were beginning to crack under the relentless grind of Hell Week. Emily wasn't cracking. Not yet, but she was, starting to feel the isolation like a weight she couldn't shake. Every night, she'd return to the barracks last, drop onto her cot, and stare at the ceiling as the others laughed and swapped stories about missions they'd never been on. She wasn't invited to talk. She wasn't part of their world. Her only conversation came from the occasional briefing, or the sharp commands barked by instructors. When someone's gear went missing, no one suspected sabotage. But Emily knew better when she found her boots soaked and buried in sand. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't clever. It was a message: go home. She didn't report it. She didn't retaliate. She simply cleaned the boots, tried them under the heater, and showed up first at roll call the next morning. The next challenge was a timed obstacle course, a brutal circuit of walls, wires, and mud that chewed up even the toughest candidates. Clock starts when I blow the whistle, Reynolds barked. First man under 15 minutes gets a pass for tonight's watch duty. Last man or woman gets cleanup. The squad chuckled. Someone muttered, "Guess who's getting cleanup?" The whistle shrieked. They bolted forward. Emily's body moved like it remembered pain. Her father's training had conditioned her reflexes to work faster than her fear. She scaled the first wall in 2 pulls, crawled under barbed wire with the grace of a shadow, and rolled into the mud with precision. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Halfway through, she was neck and neck with Petty Officer Diaz, one of the squad's top performers. His eyes darted to her in disbelief. "You trying to prove something?" He panted. She didn't answer. He tripped on a rope line. She didn't. When Emily crossed the finish line, her chest heaving, Reynolds looked at his stopwatch. 13 minutes, 42 seconds. The camp went quiet. The next fastest had clocked at 15:20. No one said anything, but their silence was louder than applause. That night, as Emily scrubbed mud from her uniform by the water spigot, Diaz approached. He didn't meet her eyes. "Good run," he muttered before walking off. It wasn't friendship, but it was something. Inside the barracks, someone had scrawled "Ghost" on her locker in chalk. It wasn't meant kindly, but the name stuck. Emily smiled faintly. A ghost can't be ignored, she thought. By the end of that first month, the whispers had changed. She doesn't talk. She doesn't break. She doesn't miss. When Chief Reynolds called her name during inspection, there was no smirk this time. Just a nod. "Lieutenant Carter," he said, scanning her spotless gear. "You're still here?" "Yes, sir. Keep it that way." As the sun dipped below the horizon that night, Emily stood alone by the shoreline. The ocean roared in the distance, black and endless, reflecting the same relentless challenge that had faced every SEAL before her. She knew this was only the beginning, the start of a battle not against her squad, but against perception itself. They could ignore her words, her presence, even her existence. But they couldn't ignore results. And one day soon, she swore, they'd have to look her in the eye. The mornings came earlier now, though the sky was still dark when the whistles blew. The barracks erupted with groans and hurried movement, boots thudding on concrete, metal bunks rattling as men scrambled into uniform. Emily Carter was always first up, her bed already made to perfection before the others even rolled over. She moved with quiet precision, a rhythm learned from countless mornings of military routine. But inside that rhythm lived the constant ache of isolation. The squad didn't speak to her. Not once. Not during drills, not during meals, not even in passing. She was invisible in plain sight. The only time they acknowledged her presence was when the instructors ordered them into formation, and even then, their eyes always shifted past her, never meeting her gaze. During the first week of tactical training, the instructors announced the buddy pair system. Each trainee needed a partner for exercises, the one person you trust to cover your 6. When Chief Reynolds called her name, the room went silent. Then he called out, "Carter, any volunteers?" The silence stretched into seconds that felt like hours. No one raised a hand. She stood straight, expression blank, though her pulse hammered beneath her calm. Finally, Reynolds paired her with Diaz, the man she had beaten on the obstacle course weeks earlier. He didn't look happy about it. "Try to keep up," he muttered under his breath as they lined up for drills. She didn't reply. The next few days blurred together in a haze of sand, sweat, and salt water. The instructors were merciless, and the ocean was colder than any punishment could ever be. They carried logs across the beach until their shoulders bled. They crawled through mud pits while instructors screamed inches from their ears. They ran for miles until their legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Emily endured every second of it in silence. When Diaz stumbled, she helped lift the log. When he lagged, she slowed her pace, not out of pity, but because they were a team now, whether he liked it or not. Still, he barely looked at her. In the mess hall, the same routine played out every night. The men clustered together at one end of the long steel tables, trading stories and laughter, the air thick with camaraderie. Emily sat alone at the far edge, the hum of conversation muffled by the distance between them. Sometimes she caught fragments of what they said, jokes about babysitting the lieutenant, bets on when she'd quit, even crude remarks whispered just loud enough for her to hear. She didn't respond. She just ate slowly, every bite mechanical, and left her tray spotless when she was done. By the second month, small acts of pettiness began to appear. Her rations once went missing from her locker. Her towel was accidentally soaked in seawater. One morning, she found her name tag peeled off and tossed in the dirt. She said nothing, simply retrieved it, cleaned it, and replaced it. Her silence unnerved them more than anger ever could. When one of the men sneered, "You don't talk much, do you, Lieutenant?" she just looked at him, eyes calm, and said evenly, "Talking doesn't make you stronger." The remark shut him down, but the distance remained. The instructors noticed the tension, but did not interfere. SEAL training was as much psychological as physical. They wanted to see how far she'd go before breaking. Every candidate was being tested, but for Emily, the test came with extra layers. The weight of proving not just her strength, but her right to exist among them. At night, she lay in her cot, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the ocean outside the barracks, lulling her into uneasy sleep. She dreamed of her father, sometimes, his voice steady, his lessons sharp as the crack of a rifle. "Don't fight the storm, Emmy," he told her once. "Become it." The next day, during weapons handling drills, she became it. Her movements were clean, efficient, methodical. She stripped and reassembled her rifle faster than anyone in her squad. Her hands moved with an almost surgical precision, the memory of her father's lessons guiding every motion. Chief Reynolds watched silently as she finished ahead of schedule, her weapons spotless and ready. "You done, Carter?" he asked, more surprised than anything. She nodded once. "Yes, sir." The rest of the men avoided her gaze as she stood at attention, her expression unreadable. That afternoon, a new kind of challenge emerged: tactical coordination. The squad was divided into two teams to simulate a mission scenario. The goal was simple: reach a mock compound, extract a hostage, and retreat under simulated fire. It required communication, trust, and instinct, all things Emily had been denied. When she tried to coordinate movement, Diaz ignored her. When she covered a sector, another man pushed past her, muttering, "We got it." They treated her like a ghost again, unseen, unheard. Halfway through the simulation, the team fell apart. Without coordination, they were flanked and eliminated. The instructors called them out publicly. "You failed because you couldn't act like a unit," Reynolds barked. His gaze swept over the group before landing on Emily. "That includes you." "Carter." She said nothing, but deep down, something tightened in her chest, not from the reprimand, but from the quiet realization that she had done everything right and still taken the fall. After the exercise, as the squad trudged back through the sand, Diaz finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. You think you're better than us because you can run fast and clean a weapon quicker? This isn't about records, Lieutenant. This is about trust. She stopped walking and faced him. Then earn it, she said simply. He stared at her for a moment before turning away. The days that followed were worse. The drills grew harder, the nights colder, the silence heavier. Yet Emily's focus never wavered. Her body ached, her fingers blistered, but her eyes stayed fixed forward. Each morning, she ran farther than required, pushing her endurance past the edge. She wasn't trying to impress them anymore. She was preparing for something bigger, the moment when performance would speak louder than prejudice. One morning, during swim qualification, she dove into the freezing Pacific while others hesitated. The current was strong, brutal, unrelenting. She cut through it like steel, her strokes efficient, her breathing steady. When she reached the buoy ahead of the group, the instructor's stopwatch confirmed what everyone saw. She'd set a new record for that rotation. The men surfaced behind her, gasping for air. No one spoke, but the silence had changed. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was uncertainty. Later that night, as she sat outside the barracks cleaning her rifle under the moonlight, Diaz approached again. He didn't say a word, just stood there watching her work. After a moment, he nodded once, a small, reluctant gesture of acknowledgement, before walking away. It wasn't friendship, but it was the first crack in the wall between her and the squad. Still, the next morning, when roll call echoed across the sand, she stood alone in the front row, the early light outlining her silhouette like a quiet defiance. Chief Reynolds passed down the line, inspecting uniforms. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't look for flaws. He looked for weakness and found none. "Still here, Carter?" he said. She met his eyes. "Still here, sir." He gave a faint grunt, half respect, half challenge. Let's see how long that lasts. The day stretched on in an endless rhythm of exhaustion, surf torture, sprints, and carrying inflatable boats over their heads until arms went numb. Emily said nothing through it all. When Diaz faltered under the weight, she shifted slightly, taking more of the load without a word. He noticed. The rest did too. Her strength wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, relentless, like the tide that never stopped hitting the shore. By the end of that week, something subtle had changed. No one offered her friendship, but no one dared to bet against her anymore either. She had earned a strange kind of presence, not acceptance, but awareness. The men still didn't talk to her, still didn't invite her into their circle, but their eyes followed her now during drills. They'd seen her endurance, her precision, her silence that didn't mean submission, but control. In the harsh rhythm of SEAL training, bonds were forged in sweat and broken by ego. Emily Carter was building something different, a reputation that no one wanted to admit they respected. She didn't need their words. The silence that once excluded her had begun to shift, ever so slightly, into something else, something uneasy, something that felt almost like recognition. And as she lay in her bunk that night, the sound of the ocean outside her window, she knew that the wall was starting to crack. She didn't need to break it down. She would simply outlast it. The wind howled off the Pacific that night, cold enough to sting bare skin and cut through layers of wet fabric. The sky was an empty void, the stars buried under a blanket of low clouds, and the ocean was a black, endless roar beyond the dunes. The recruits had been ordered into the surf again midnight drills, punishment for a teammate's mistake during navigation training. It didn't matter who had made the error. They would all pay for it. That was the rule. The instructors called it shared suffering. But for Emily Carter, it felt different. It felt like isolation disguised as unity. She stood shoulder deep in freezing water, the waves crashing against her face, the salt burning her eyes. Around her, The men cursed and shivered, their bodies trembling, their breaths turning to mist. Someone muttered her name under his breath, not kindly. The sound was swallowed by the ocean. When the whistle finally blew, they stumbled out of the surf, water streaming from their uniforms. "Get back on the sand," Chief Reynolds barked. "On your backs flutter kicks until I say stop." The cold sand clung to her wet clothes as Emily fell into position. Her muscles screamed. Her vision blurred. But she didn't slow down. She counted every kick in her head, her breath ragged but steady. Around her, some of the men groaned and gasped for mercy. The instructors shouted louder. "You think the enemy cares if you're tired? You think pain earns you respect?" The words cut through the air like knives. Emily didn't need to hear them. She'd been living them since the day she arrived. After what felt like hours, the whistle blew again. The squad collapsed, some coughing, some too numb to move. "Back to the barracks," came the next order. Emily pushed herself to her feet, legs shaking, her body trembling from exhaustion and cold. The walk back felt endless. Every step left a trail of wet sand behind her boots. Inside the barracks, the air was warm, but heavy with the smell of sweat and fatigue. She peeled off her soaked jacket, her fingers numb. The others moved around her without a word. Some exchanged tired glances, some muttered complaints, but no one looked her way. She sat on her bunk, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. Her reflection in the metal locker across from her looked like someone else entirely, eyes hollow, lips pale, body hunched from exhaustion. For the first time since she arrived, doubt crept in. She had outworked them all, endured every insult, every slight, every lonely meal, and still, it wasn't enough. They didn't see her as one of them. They didn't even see her at all. She wondered if this was what her father meant when he told her respect was earned, not given. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe there were some walls too thick to break through. Her hands trembled as she reached for her duffel bag. Inside, wrapped carefully in a waterproof pouch, was the letter she had read only once before arriving, the one written in her father's rough, uneven handwriting. He had written it before his final deployment years ago, long before she ever imagined joining the Navy. She hesitated, then unfolded it, her eyes scanning the faded ink under the dim barracks light. "Emmy, if you're reading this, it means you're chasing something hard. Good. Don't ever stop. You'll meet people who think they know what you can't do. Let them. Don't waste energy convincing them otherwise, just show them. Respect isn't given, it's earned in silence, one breath at a time. When everything hurts, when you're tired, and no one believes in you, that's the moment you find out who you are." She stared at those last words for a long time, her throat tightening. The noise of the barracks faded, replaced by the sound of her father's voice in her head, steady and calm as it had always been. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into her pocket, pressing it against her chest like a shield. Then she stood. The next morning, she was up before reveille. The sky was still black, the air cold enough to sting, but she was already running alone, along the shoreline, her boots pounding against the wet sand. The waves crashed beside her, matching her pace. Every breath burned, but she kept going, faster, harder. When the sun finally began to rise, spilling gold across the horizon, she was drenched in sweat and seawater. But something inside her had shifted. The doubt hadn't disappeared. It had hardened into resolve. When she returned to the compound, the others were just waking up. Some stared as she jogged past, her uniform soaked, her face calm. No one said a word. That silence, the same one that once cut her, now fueled her. She didn't need their voices anymore. She had found her own. Throughout that week, the tempo of training intensified. The instructors pushed harder, yelling louder, testing the limits of every candidate's mind and body. Sleep deprivation became a weapon. Food became fuel measured in survival, not taste. Men broke down under the weight of exhaustion. Some quit. Some simply vanished from formation the next day. Emily didn't flinch. She had learned to breathe through pain, to move when her body screamed to stop. During one drill, they were ordered to carry heavy telephone poles, boats, they called them, across the beach in teams. The logs weighed hundreds of pounds. Sweat and grit mixed with salt water until everything burned. Diaz, her reluctant partner, struggled near the end, his grip slipping. Without a word, Emily shifted her stance, taking on more of the load. He noticed but said nothing. They crossed the finish line first. That night, for the first time, someone slid a tray across the table toward her during dinner. It was Diaz. "You earned extra rations," he said quietly. She nodded, accepting without a word. The others still avoided her, but now their silence had changed. It wasn't contempt anymore. It was confusion. She had endured everything they threw at her and refused to break. And that unsettled them more than any confrontation ever could. Still, when lights went out and the barracks fell into darkness, she lay awake. The loneliness was still there, whispering in the quiet corners of her mind. But it no longer scared her. It was part of the process now, part of the test her father had written about. She replayed his words again, one breath at a time. By the end of that month, her reputation had quietly begun to grow beyond her squad. Instructors whispered about her endurance, her refusal to quit, her calm under pressure. Chief Reynolds had even mentioned her during a briefing not by name, but everyone knew who he meant when he said, "Some of you need to start learning what discipline looks like." On the final night of that training phase, a storm rolled in. The ocean thundered against the coast, and rain hammered the camp roof. The recruits huddled inside, drenched and exhausted after hours of cold water drills. Emily sat near the window, watching lightning strike the dark horizon. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her, a mix of anger, pride, and determination. She realized something profound in that moment. She didn't need to be accepted to belong here. Her worth wasn't measured by their opinions, but by her performance, her persistence, her results. When dawn finally broke, the rain had stopped. The camp was silent, the ground still wet. The whistle blew, calling them out for morning formation. Emily stepped into line, her boots splashing through puddles. Chief Reynolds paced in front of them, scanning the faces of his exhausted candidates. His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. There was no smirk this time, no challenge in his tone when he said, "Let's see who still has fight left." She didn't look away. For the first time since arriving, she met his eyes with quiet certainty. She had found her breaking point and turned it into her foundation. As the day's drills began and the squad charged forward, she moved like part of the storm steady, unshaken, unstoppable. The letter in her pocket pressed against her chest with every breath, reminding her of the truth she had earned the hard way. Respect wasn't something she needed to ask for. It was something she would make impossible to deny. The days blurred together as Emily Carter's presence became something neither ignorable nor understood. She moved through each drill with a precision that was almost unnatural, her body responding to exhaustion as if it were instinct. When the squad ran obstacle courses, she scaled walls with a fluid grace, sometimes pausing to observe how the others struggled. Her movements were quiet, economical, deliberate, every muscle coordinated with a control that came from years of preparation and training. The men noticed. Not in words, not in praise, but in furtive glances, subtle hesitations, and the tightening of jaws as she passed them during every exercise. She had become a shadow at first, and then a ghost. One that could not be ignored, not in the mornings. She was the first on the beach, boots sinking into wet sand. body already warm from sprints along the shoreline. She timed her breaths, measured her stride, and adjusted her posture with meticulous attention. The instructors noticed this, whispering among themselves. Chief Reynolds, who had spent decades pushing candidates to their absolute limit, found himself pausing during inspections to watch her. He was silent about it, but the nods he gave when she completed her drills were heavier with meaning than any words of encouragement could convey. Even the older, hardened candidates, men who had been ranked near the top of every previous cycle, began to look at her with a mixture of skepticism and unease. She was improving faster than anyone, outpacing the best, yet doing it without arrogance or complaint. It wasn't just her physical performance that drew attention. Emily's mental acuity was beginning to make waves. During tactical exercises, she anticipated the moves of her squad mates, adjusted positions before mistakes could happen, and silently corrected errors without speaking. Diaz, the same man who had once avoided her gaze, now found himself keeping pace beside her, noticing how she read the terrain, how her focus never wavered, and how she never allowed fatigue to dictate her choices. On more than one occasion, he caught himself thinking that her silence was more commanding than the shouted orders from the instructors. The squad's attitude toward her shifted subtly, imperceptibly, yet significantly. They didn't start talking to her, didn't ask for advice or attempt camaraderie. Instead, they began to respect the space she claimed. They gave her room on obstacle courses, allowed her to take the lead during navigation drills, and adjusted their pace to keep her in formation, all without a single word. It was a grudging acknowledgement, one earned not by charm or argument, but by relentless performance and unyielding resilience. Emily found herself drawing strange satisfaction from their reactions. The quiet respect of others, earned rather than demanded, was a currency she had learned to value long before she arrived at Coronado. Each time a teammate glanced at her with something approaching recognition, she reminded herself not to let it distract her. The work was never over, and the fight was never personal. It was about mastery, discipline, and proving, silently but undeniably, that she belonged. During one particularly grueling day, the squad was tasked with a timed endurance swim through choppy waters, the current strong enough to test even the most experienced swimmers. Emily dove in without hesitation, cutting through the waves with precise strokes that conserved energy while maximizing speed. Halfway through the course, a younger recruit floundered, panic flashing across his face. Without calling attention to it, she adjusted her course slightly, positioning herself so that if he sank, she could intercept him immediately. The instructor didn't intervene, the squad didn't notice, but the subtle intervention was enough to keep the recruit afloat. When she reached the final buoy, gasping for air, she realized that her silent command over the situation had been absolute. The squad, drenched and exhausted behind her, fell in line without realizing it. By the end of that week, her reputation had begun to solidify into legend. Whispers of the ghost circulated quietly, carried on the wind between ranks. It was no longer a joke or a nickname meant to demean her. It was a recognition of something elusive yet undeniable. A woman who could not be broken, who moved with precision, and whose skill demanded attention without a single raised voice. The instructors began using her as an example during briefings, pointing out her flawless technique in maneuvers, her unwavering endurance, and her ability to maintain focus under extreme duress. Despite the growing recognition, Emily remained detached from her squad. She spoke when spoken to, obeyed orders without question, and continued to perform every drill with mechanical perfection. She didn't seek acknowledgement, didn't crave approval, and never displayed frustration at the continued distance from her peers. This quiet dominance was, in many ways, more unsettling than open confrontation. It was impossible to dismiss, impossible to mock, and impossible to ignore. Her nightly routine became ritualized, almost meditative. After drills, she would retreat to her cot, wash off the grime of the day, and carefully inspect her gear. She polished her weapons, checked her uniform, and prepared her kit for the following day with meticulous attention to detail. Every action was deliberate, reinforcing discipline not only in her body but in her mind. She had become a force, a standard against which others would soon measure themselves. One afternoon, during a live fire drill at the range, the squad was paired in teams to simulate suppression and cover tactics. Emily's team was last to fire. The other recruits had shot rounds that scattered across the targets, some missing entirely. She approached her station calmly, adjusted her stance, and focused entirely on the target. Her hands were steady, her breath controlled, and the shots were flawless. Each round hit precisely where intended, tighter than any grouping her teammates had achieved. A silence fell over the range. Even Diaz, standing beside her, could only watch in stunned recognition. The shift in attitude was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. The men no longer laughed when she walked by. They didn't mock her attempts during drills. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement, an understanding that this woman was not merely enduring alongside them. She was leading by example, without a single word. The instructors, too, watched with increasing interest, noting the combination of endurance, skill, and mental focus that set her apart. By the time the week ended, Emily Carter had become something more than a trainee. She was a standard bearer, a ghost in the ranks whose every action carried meaning beyond herself. The squad still avoided direct interaction, still kept her at arm's length socially, but the hierarchy had shifted. They noticed when she excelled, they followed her lead without being told, and the quiet fear and respect in their glances were impossible to miss. That night, she sat alone outside the barracks, staring at the dark ocean, letting the sounds of waves and wind wash over her. She thought about the men she trained alongside, about the instructors, and about the walls of skepticism she had begun to crack simply by showing up and performing. Her father's words echoed in her mind once more. Respect isn't given. It's earned one breath at a time. She had survived the cold, the isolation, the scorn, and had begun to turn every doubt against those who cast it as the first hints of dawn streaked across the horizon. Emily allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She didn't need their words or approval. She only needed results. And soon, she would have proof that her presence was not only real but undeniable. Every training exercise, every drill, every painstaking movement of her body was a step toward that moment. She was no longer invisible, no longer merely tolerated. She was becoming something else entirely, a ghost who could not be ignored, a force that demanded recognition through action alone. The night faded into morning, and with it came the promise of another relentless day of training. Emily stood, shoulders square, eyes forward, ready to face the storm once more. She didn't speak to the squad, didn't ask for acknowledgement, and didn't seek friendship. All that mattered was the work, the discipline, and the quiet, unstoppable march toward mastery. Every step she took was a statement, every breath a declaration. She belonged, and soon the entire camp would have no choice but to see it. The desert range stretched endlessly under the harsh midday sun, waves of heat rising off the sand in shimmering mirages. The smell of gunpowder lingered in the air, sharp and acrid, blending with the dry scent of dust and sweat. Today was the day of the Advanced Weapons Qualification, a test that had broken more than a few of the finest candidates before Emily Carter ever arrived. It was a proving ground, designed to separate those who were competent from those who were exceptional. The squad assembled, rifles slung over their shoulders, faces a mix of determination and fatigue. Emily stood among them, her posture impeccable, her breathing slow and steady. Around her, the men exchanged confident smirks, a silent declaration that she would struggle under the pressure of live-fire, long-range shooting. They had watched her excel at endurance drills, at obstacle courses, at tactical simulations, but this, they assumed, would reveal her limits. The instructors lined up the targets at varying distances: 50 meters, 100 meters, and 200 meters. Each candidate would fire in sequence, measured and timed, under the unforgiving scrutiny of the experts. The rules were simple: precision, speed, and control. Fail to perform, and the consequences were immediate, public, and unforgiving. The first recruit stepped forward. A tall, broad-shouldered man named Harris raised his rifle, adjusted the scope, and exhaled. The crack of the first round echoed through the desert. His shots scattered, some hitting the target, others falling just off-center. He cursed under his breath. The second candidate fared no better. Diaz, Emily's former skeptic and now reluctant observer, moved with confidence. But even his grouping was inconsistent. Tiny errors, magnified by the desert heat and the unrelenting pressure. When it was Emily's turn, the squad watched with barely concealed disbelief. She approached the firing line calmly, not a muscle out of place. She adjusted her stance, planted her feet firmly, and took a slow, controlled breath. The desert heat pressed down, the sun reflecting off her rifle barrel, yet her focus was absolute. Around her, whispers floated, barely audible over the instructor's commands. "She's calm. Too calm." Someone muttered. Her first shot cracked through the air, a perfect center hit. The instructors glanced at each other, surprise flickering in their eyes. The second shot followed, landing even closer to the bullseye, tighter than anything recorded that morning. The squad grew silent, disbelief etched into every face. Emily's breathing remained steady. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, flawless. The sun burned, the sand stung, and yet she seemed untouchable. Every breath synchronized with the recoil of the rifle, every heartbeat measured like a metronome. By the fifth shot, it became clear to everyone present. This was not just competence. This was mastery. The groupings were so precise that the instructors exchanged stunned glances. Even Diaz, standing just behind her, felt a knot of awe tighten in his chest. The man who had once dismissed her as an outsider now realized that Emily Carter was not only capable, she was extraordinary. As she continued through the range, moving from closer targets to the farthest distances, her precision never wavered. Every shot landed where she intended, tighter and cleaner than any of the men who had doubted her skill. Around her, the desert seemed to hush, the wind carrying a silence that was almost reverent. No one dared comment, no one dared breathe too loudly. The very air seemed to acknowledge her presence. When she finished, she lowered her rifle and exhaled, her calm exterior unbroken. The instructors walked the line, inspecting her target. They murmured among themselves, faces tight with disbelief and admiration. Chief Reynolds finally stepped forward, his gravelly voice cutting through the quiet. "Lieutenant Carter, that is perfect. All shots in the center. Record-breaking accuracy for this rotation." The squad, who had spent months ignoring her, who had doubted her every move, could not look away. Their silence was heavy, thick with realization. The same men who had once whispered, mocked, and avoided her now understood. This woman could not be dismissed. She was not just a participant in their drills. She was a standard bearer, a measure of excellence they had never anticipated. Diaz approached cautiously, his expression unreadable. How are you doing that?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Emily didn't answer. She simply cleaned her rifle, her motions calm, precise, deliberate. She didn't need to explain. Her performance spoke louder than words ever could. The other men shifted uncomfortably, some hiding their awe, others pretending indifference. But the truth was undeniable. Emily had outshot every SEAL in the range that day. She had earned a respect that no one had expected, and she hadn't even sought it. Every breath, every controlled movement, every silent moment of focus had combined into a demonstration of skill, so extraordinary that even the instructors were compelled to recognize it. That afternoon, the squad gathered for debriefing, but Emily remained silent, sitting apart from the group. The men still didn't speak to her, but their eyes lingered longer than usual. She noticed Diaz glancing her way, a faint nod of acknowledgement barely perceptible. It was small, but it was significant. This was the first time someone from her squad had recognized her achievement without prompting or order. Later, in the barracks, the whispers began. "Did you see her grouping?" Every shot dead center. I didn't think it was possible. Emily remained quiet, cleaning her rifle meticulously, the faint smile on her face unnoticed by most. She didn't need the praise. She had done exactly what she came to do, prove that skill, focus, and perseverance could not be ignored. That evening, as the sun set over the desert and shadows stretched long and thin across the training compound, Emily stood outside the barracks, rifle in hand, watching the horizon. She felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that came from knowing she had earned recognition without a word, without complaint, without compromise. The squad may have ignored her for months, but today had changed everything. The first step toward respect had been taken, and it had been measured not in words, but in bullets. Her father's letter, tucked into her pocket, felt heavier in her hand now. Respect isn't given. It's earned in silence, one breath at a time. That sentence had never felt more real. She had earned it today. And though the squad hadn't admitted it aloud, she could feel the shift in the air. They were watching her differently now. The same walls of doubt and indifference that had surrounded her since day one had begun to crack. Even the instructors acknowledged her quietly during the evening briefing. Carter's performance today was exemplary. One muttered under his breath, "We'll be citing it in training manuals." Emily didn't hear it, or if she did, she didn't react. She had long ago learned that the acknowledgement of others was secondary to her own measure of excellence. The results spoke for themselves, and the results were undeniable. That night, she laid her rifle carefully on her bunk, stripped off her uniform, and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached from sun, sweat, and exertion, but her mind was sharp, clear, and untroubled. She had survived the desert, the heat, the scrutiny, and the doubt. She had outshot everyone. She had proven that precision, patience, and quiet endurance were worth far more than mockery or dismissal. And she had done it alone, without seeking validation or praise. Tomorrow would bring new drills, new challenges, new tests. But tonight, Emily allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. The desert had witnessed her skill, the squad had seen her precision, and the instructors had acknowledged it. She had earned her place, not by speaking, not by fighting for attention, but by mastering the craft that had been her life's work. She didn't celebrate, didn't boast, didn't announce her victory. She simply cleaned her rifle, tucked the letter back into her pocket, and lay back on her cot. Outside, the desert night hummed softly, a quiet witness to the fact that the woman they had ignored for months had, in a single afternoon, become impossible to overlook. Emily Carter had arrived as a ghost, but by the end of the day, she had become something more of force, silent, precise, unstoppable. And the squad, the instructors, and even the desert itself had begun to understand. This was a soldier who could not be ignored, a competitor who would not be underestimated, and a presence that would shape the days to come. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint tang of salt from the nearby ocean. Emily Carter was already on the beach before the first whistle blew, her boots leaving shallow impressions in the damp sand. The squad was sluggish, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes, others nursing aches from yesterday's grueling range. She moved with quiet determination, stretching and checking her gear, focusing her mind the way she always had, mentally reviewing every lesson, every drill, every instruction drilled into her since the first day of training. She didn't look at the others, didn't seek their approval. She simply prepared, and in her preparation lay her power. When the squad assembled for the day's exercises, there was an almost imperceptible shift in the air. The men who had ignored her before now glanced in her direction, hesitation flickering across their faces. It was subtle, yet undeniable a recognition that Emily Carter was no ordinary candidate. Even Diaz, who had once muttered dismissive remarks under his breath, now seemed tense, calculating, aware of her silent authority. There were no words, no acknowledgments yet, but the quiet respect was spreading like a current through the group. The instructors wasted no time. Today's drill was a multi-stage obstacle course, one designed not only to test physical endurance, but also leadership, coordination, and problem-solving under pressure. Teams were assigned for the first time, and for the first time, Emily found herself paired with multiple recruits rather than a single partner. The task required coordination, trust, and swift decision-making. The others looked at her skeptically, their doubts still simmering beneath the surface. But Emily stepped forward with calm confidence. She didn't speak. Her body language, her decisiveness, her unwavering focus communicated everything necessary. The first obstacle was a series of high walls, requiring both strength and strategy to navigate quickly. Emily didn't wait for instruction. She moved fluidly, scaling the first wall with ease, and assessing the best approach for the others. She offered a hand to those struggling, not as charity but as efficiency, ensuring the team moved as one. The men hesitated at first, unfamiliar with following her lead, but when they realized that Emily's guidance reduced wasted effort and improved their speed, they began to fall in line. Diaz was the first to acknowledge it silently, matching her pace, observing her choices, and unconsciously adopting her method. The next obstacle was the mud crawl beneath barbed wire, a test of endurance and mental fortitude. Most of the squad hesitated, measuring risk and discomfort against personal pride. Emily, already in position, crawled forward with deliberate control, keeping her head low, her movements quiet but efficient. She maintained a rhythm, breathing evenly, navigating the sticky muck without losing speed or focus. One of the younger recruits stumbled, his hand catching the barbed wire. Without breaking her stride, Emily adjusted slightly, signaling with a subtle hand movement for him to shift his weight. He followed, trusting her without question. By the time the obstacle was complete, the squad's collective pace had increased, and a new dynamic had taken root. Even during the running sections, Emily's influence became more apparent. She set the pace, matching the fastest runners without pushing them beyond capability, offering a silent model of endurance. Her rhythm, her control, and her calm determination created a flow the others instinctively followed. The squad, previously fractured by doubt and exclusion, was now functioning, subtly but unmistakably, under her unspoken command. During the final stage, a simulated hostage extraction exercise, the instructors expected chaos. Candidates often failed at this point, overcomplicating their movements, panicking under pressure, or arguing over leadership. Emily approached the simulation with a methodical clarity. She quickly assessed the terrain, designated positions without announcing authority, and moved with confidence that was impossible to ignore. Her instructions were minimal, precise, and effective. The men followed instinctively. For the first time, Diaz and several other skeptics acted in concert with her, not out of compliance, but because her choices were demonstrably superior. When the squad completed the exercise successfully, It was a first. Never before had such a group managed to coordinate seamlessly under the pressure of simulated combat conditions. The instructors exchanged impressed glances, murmuring their approval while keeping their praise measured. Chief Reynolds finally addressed the squad, his voice cutting through the post-drill adrenaline. "This is the kind of teamwork we expect," he said. "Some of you might not realize it, but you followed the lead of someone exceptional today." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the group, then linger briefly on Emily. Carter set the example. The acknowledgement, though subtle, was monumental. Emily's peers could no longer ignore her. Respect had shifted from theoretical to tangible. They didn't yet speak to her openly, but they had begun to listen, to notice, to understand that she was not a competitor to dismiss, but a leader to recognize. It was a delicate balance of tension and admiration, one that Emily managed without changing her behavior. She didn't seek praise. She simply performed, and in doing so, earned the reluctant acknowledgement of those who had once overlooked her entirely. That evening, during downtime in the barracks, Emily noticed the smallest of changes. Diaz approached her, not to challenge, not to tease, but to ask a question about strategy for the next drill. He kept his tone neutral, careful, as if testing her patience or her reaction. She answered with precision, clarity, and brevity, providing enough information to guide him without dominating the conversation. The dynamic had shifted subtly. He sought her guidance, unconsciously acknowledging her expertise. Others in the room noticed, and though no one spoke directly, a quiet current of awareness ran through the squad. Outside, the desert wind carried the fading heat of the day, stirring the dust around the barracks. Emily stood on the edge of the training compound, rifle in hand, surveying the horizon. She reflected on the day, the subtle victories, the small acknowledgments, and the gradual transformation of her squad. She had not demanded respect. She had earned it through action, through discipline, and through an unyielding focus that was now impossible for anyone to dismiss. Her father's letter, tucked safely in her pocket, seemed heavier now, as though the words themselves carried the weight of every struggle she had endured. Respect isn't given. It's earned one breath at a time. Every challenge, every silent exercise, every long, grueling drill had led to this day. She was no longer invisible. She was a standard bearer, a force of quiet authority in a world that had once dismissed her entirely. The next morning, as the sun rose, Emily returned to the beach, already in motion. She ran, swam, and prepared with the same relentless focus, knowing that every day was a new test. The squad followed more closely now, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes willingly, but always with awareness of her presence and her capability. Even without words, the influence she wielded reshaped the dynamics of every exercise. By the end of the week, the change was undeniable. Men who had once mocked or ignored her now deferred to her instinctively during drills, observing her movements, gauging her choices, and internalizing her methods. The instructors took note, incorporating her techniques into teaching moments. Emily, however, remained unchanged. She spoke when necessary, acted with calm precision, and let her performance continue to speak louder than words ever could. Through every grueling day, every silent night, Emily Carter had transformed from a ghost in the squad to an undeniable presence, a leader without a title, a model of discipline and excellence. She had shown that performance, not politics or popularity, commanded respect, and that even in a world dominated by doubt and skepticism, quiet determination could alter perception, reshape dynamics, and create a force that could not be ignored. And as the desert sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks of red and gold, Emily stood alone on the edge of the compound, breathing steadily, eyes clear, mind unshaken. The squad had begun to see her for what she truly was, not an outsider, not a curiosity, but a standard-bearer, a leader and a force of nature whose presence would shape every day to come. She didn't celebrate, didn't boast, didn't need to. The acknowledgement of her peers, slow and subtle though it was all the confirmation she required. She had arrived, and from this point forward, she would be impossible to ignore. The morning was heavy with fog, the kind that rolled in from the ocean and clung to the training compound like a living thing. Visibility was low, and the chill cut through uniforms and sweat-soaked skin alike. Today's drill was the culmination of weeks of grueling exercises, a full-day simulation designed to test every candidate's endurance, strategy, teamwork, and marksmanship under the most extreme conditions. The instructors made no effort to sugarcoat it. Today separates the hunters from the hunted, Chief Reynolds barked as he surveyed the squad. There are no second chances. There is no mercy. Only performance counts. Emily Carter stood among the squad, her eyes focused, her posture calm, every muscle coiled and ready. Around her, the men shifted nervously, some checking gear repeatedly, others muttering under their breath. They were tense because they knew deep down that this would not be an ordinary day. Even the instructors, seasoned veterans of countless training cycles, exchanged glances as if silently acknowledging that Emily was no longer just a candidate. She was a force they had to measure. The exercise began with a grueling run through uneven terrain, followed by simulated urban combat. The fog made navigation tricky, each step uncertain, each turn potentially dangerous. Emily led by example, maintaining a pace that was fast but controlled, constantly scanning the environment, anticipating obstacles before they appeared. The squad followed, not because she had claimed authority, but because instinctively they recognized her skill and precision. Even Diaz, who had once doubted her, moved in step with her, learning without being explicitly instructed, letting her decisions guide him. Midway through the exercise, the squad encountered a simulated ambush. Smoke canisters filled the area, gunfire echoed, and chaos erupted as candidates scrambled for cover. Men shouted orders, some faltered, some panicked. Emily moved with methodical calm, crouching behind a wall, scanning the area, identifying threats with precision. She pointed silently, signaling the correct positions for her teammates, guiding them through the confusion without raising her voice. Slowly, the squad fell into rhythm, moving cohesively under her unspoken direction. The simulation intensified as they navigated booby-trapped terrain, where one misstep meant instant failure. Fatigue weighed heavily on the men. Muscles burned, lungs gasped, minds teetered on the edge of panic. Emily, however, seemed almost impervious. Every movement was calculated, every decision deliberate. She offered no words of encouragement, no boastful instructions. She simply led by example. The others, exhausted and disoriented, followed her, not out of loyalty, but because it was the only way to survive. During a particularly intense stage, the squad had to cross a narrow bridge under simulated sniper fire. The instructors fired blanks from hidden positions, forcing candidates to move quickly and precisely. Most stumbled, hesitated, or froze under pressure. Emily, however, stepped forward calmly, calculating each movement, adjusting her stance, and moving across with a grace and precision that left the others in awe. Diaz followed closely, emulating her rhythm and trusting her instincts, while the rest of the squad gradually fell into alignment. By the time they reached the other side, what had begun as chaos had transformed into disciplined cohesion, a team operating as one under Emily's silent guidance. The final stage of the simulation involved a hostage extraction drill in a mock urban setting. It required stealth, strategy, and perfect timing. The instructors warned that this was the stage where most candidates failed, where ego, fatigue, or hesitation would prove fatal. Emily assessed the layout quickly, identified the optimal path, and communicated non-verbally with the squad. They moved like shadows, silent and precise, avoiding traps, neutralizing simulated threats, and positioning themselves exactly where she had indicated. Every action was intentional, every step calculated. The squad had never functioned this efficiently, and the instructors took notice, muttering under their breath. When the simulated hostages were rescued, the exercise concluded, but the tension didn't dissipate. Sweat-soaked and exhausted, the squad gathered for debriefing. Instructors circled, inspecting performance, noting errors, and praising those who had excelled. Yet the attention was almost entirely on Emily. Her performance had been flawless, every decision correct, every movement precise, every shot, every calculation perfect. The squad, who had once ignored her, now looked at her with a mixture of respect, disbelief, and awe. Diaz finally approached her, voice low, tinged with something he had never expressed before. Respect. I didn't know you were capable of that, he admitted quietly. Emily met his eyes, but said nothing. Her performance had spoken for itself. That was enough. Other recruits began to murmur among themselves, acknowledging silently that she was no longer just part of the squad. She was its anchor, its standard, the measure against which all others would be judged. The instructors, too, were unanimous in their assessment. Chief Reynolds' gravelly voice cut through the air. Carter has set a new benchmark today. Every recruit should take note. Skill, focus, and calm under pressure are worth more than bravado or complaints. Learn from her example. The statement was simple, yet its weight carried across the entire squad. Emily's influence had transformed from subtle respect to undeniable authority, recognized openly even by the harshest evaluators. That night, the squad gathered in the barracks, exhausted and silent. There was no need for words. The tension of the day had shifted into quiet acknowledgement. Men who had doubted her, who had whispered and sneered, now deferred, watching her, listening to her instructions when necessary, and learning from the unspoken cues she offered. Emily remained calm, meticulous, and composed, tending to her gear, cleaning her rifle, preparing for the next day with the same quiet determination. She didn't boast. She didn't demand recognition. She didn't need it. Outside, the fog rolled back over the ocean, the night thick and still. Emily stepped outside, feeling the cool wind against her skin, letting it dry the sweat and salt from the day. She thought about the months of training, the scorn, the isolation, and the silent victories that had led her here. She had outshot, outmaneuvered, and outlasted every expectation placed upon her. The squad had begun to see her not as an anomaly, but as a standard, a model of discipline, endurance, and skill. She touched the letter tucked into her pocket, feeling the weight of her father's words. Respect isn't given. It's earned in silence, one breath at a time. Today had proven it in the most tangible way possible. She had earned their attention, their respect, and their acknowledgement, not through words or argument, but through skill, precision, and unwavering focus. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, steady and calm. The world doesn't hand you recognition. You take it by proving yourself. She had done exactly that. The squad, once fractured and divided, had begun to function as a unit. Their cohesion, guided subtly and silently by Emily, had reached a level none of them had anticipated. She had become more than a peer. She had become a quiet leader, a presence impossible to ignore, a force that reshaped the dynamics of the entire group. And yet, Emily's work was never finished. She knew that every victory was only temporary, that every day brought new challenges and tests. She didn't rest on past achievements. She didn't celebrate. She simply prepared for what was next, understanding that true respect was not static. It was earned anew with every breath, every decision, and every action. As the night deepened, Emily stood at the edge of the training compound, looking out over the fog-shrouded ocean. The squad had begun to recognize her as a leader, the instructors had acknowledged her skill, and even the harshest critics had begun to defer to her judgment. She had arrived as a ghost, invisible to those around her. Today, she had become something far more, a force, a standard, and an undeniable presence whose impact would echo through every day of training yet to come. The morning was electric with tension. The sun had barely risen, but the training compound hummed with the charged energy of candidates and instructors alike. Today was the final evaluation, the culmination of weeks of relentless drills, endurance tests, and live fire exercises. This was the stage where reputations would be solidified, where mediocrity would be exposed, and where those who had persevered would finally be recognized. Emily Carter stood at the edge of the line, her gear meticulously arranged, boots firmly planted in the damp sand. Around her, the squad moved with a mix of nervous energy and anticipation. Their eyes, once filled with doubt or dismissiveness, now tracked her movements with quiet attention. They had seen her skill, her focus, her endurance, but this final day would prove her true place. The instructors briefed the squad, laying out a complex scenario that combined land navigation, tactical assaults, live fire exercises, and strategic problem-solving. Every element was designed to test not just physical ability, but leadership, critical thinking, and cohesion under extreme stress. Emily listened carefully, absorbing every detail. Her mind ran simulations of the course, calculating angles, timing movements, anticipating hazards, and plotting the optimal route for both herself and her squad. She did not speak during the briefing, but her eyes, calm and unwavering, conveyed the certainty and preparedness that had become her signature. As the exercise began, Emily moved with purpose. Her squad followed, initially hesitating, uncertain whether to trust her judgment fully, but each step she took demonstrated clarity, precision, and unwavering confidence. They were forced to acknowledge, even silently, that she was not just keeping pace, she was leading, guiding them, demonstrating exactly how to execute every maneuver flawlessly. During the first leg, a grueling desert run through uneven terrain, Emily set the pace without overexertion, matching the stamina of the strongest candidates while keeping her breathing controlled, her mind sharp. When they reached the first live fire scenario, tension surged. Targets were placed at varying distances, obstacles limited visibility, and the instructors observed keenly, waiting for mistakes. Emily raised her rifle with steady hands, aligned her sight, and executed with surgical precision. Each shot hit its mark, tighter than any grouping the instructors had recorded, faster than any candidate could maintain under stress. The squad, inspired yet intimidated, followed her lead. Diaz, usually quick to boast or critique, found himself mirroring her approach, adopting her calm rhythm and measured decision-making. The scenario escalated quickly. Simulated explosions shook the ground, smoke filled the air, and other teams moved erratically, succumbing to panic and fatigue. Emily navigated her squad through each challenge, signaling silently, maintaining a rhythm that allowed them to move as a single unit. Every obstacle was met with strategic solutions, every error corrected with subtle guidance. By mid-afternoon, the instructors were visibly impressed, noting the cohesion of a squad that had once been fractured and divided. Emily had transformed them from a group of individuals into a synchronized unit, a testament to her influence and quiet leadership. The penultimate stage involved a simulated hostage extraction under extreme pressure. The target was hidden in a complex structure, with multiple threats positioned to test every skill the candidates had developed. Most squads faltered here. Arguments erupted. Coordination broke down. Emily assessed the situation quickly, choosing her approach with precision. She moved first, signaling with gestures and nods for her squad to follow. Each candidate acted not out of fear or obligation, but because Emily had demonstrated the path with absolute clarity. They cleared rooms, neutralized threats, and moved in perfect sync. The hostages were rescued, without error, a flawless execution that left even the toughest instructors nodding in approval. When the final scenario concluded, the squad gathered exhausted, bruised, and drenched in sweat. The instructors approached, taking careful stock of performance. Chief Reynolds' voice cut through the heavy silence. "This is what excellence looks like. Every recruit should take note of how Carter executed today. Every move calculated, every decision precise. She has set the standard. Learn from it or be left behind." The words, firm and measured, carried a weight the entire squad felt deep in their bones. Emily, standing quietly, allowed the acknowledgement to settle around her. She didn't speak, didn't boast, didn't seek the applause or congratulations that might have followed someone else. Her victory was in her performance, in the silent acknowledgement of skill and competence. She had arrived as a ghost, unnoticed, doubted, and disregarded. Today, she was a force, undeniable and respected. The squad had witnessed her mastery and could no longer treat her as an outsider. Diaz approached her cautiously, his voice quiet and tentative. I underestimated you," he admitted, a rare vulnerability showing. Emily simply nodded, acknowledging the statement without a word. Actions, not words, had earned the respect. He understood this. Other recruits began to approach as well, questions asked, guidance sought, subtle admissions of acknowledgement. The dynamic that had defined the squad for weeks' dismissal, skepticism, distance, had been shattered by relentless skill, determination, and composure under pressure. As evening fell, the squad gathered for the final debriefing. The instructors praised top performers, noted errors, and highlighted lessons. Emily's name, unsurprisingly, was cited repeatedly not merely for physical skill, but for leadership, decision-making, and the ability to transform a hesitant, fractured squad into a cohesive, effective team. She had not demanded leadership, but it had been conferred upon her through action, through excellence, and through the unshakable calm that guided every step of her journey. Later, alone in the barracks, Emily reflected on her path. She thought about the weeks of isolation, the whispered doubts, the subtle exclusions, and the quiet victories she had achieved. Each drill, each challenge, each day had been an opportunity to demonstrate skill, discipline, and resilience. She had arrived as a ghost, ignored and dismissed. She was leaving, not with the praise of words, but with the undeniable acknowledgement of competence, the respect of peers, and the recognition of instructors who had seen few candidates match her level of focus and mastery. Outside, the night sky stretched wide, stars glittering like distant watchful eyes. Emily stood at the edge of the training compound, rifle in hand, breathing steady, every thought focused yet calm. She felt the weight of the day, the fatigue in her muscles, and the satisfaction of completion. The squad, once indifferent, now saw her as a peer, a standard, a silent leader. The transformation was complete. She had earned respect, not by asking, not by complaining, not by performing to impress, but by being flawless in execution, relentless in effort, and unwavering in focus. Her father's letter, still tucked in her pocket, seemed to pulse with meaning now. Respect isn't given. It's earned in silence, one breath at a time. She had earned it, and then some. The world of the SEAL training program was harsh, unforgiving, and relentless, yet Emily Carter had endured. She had proven her skill under fire, her calm under pressure, her influence over a team that had once disregarded her. And in doing so, she had claimed a place that no doubt, mockery, or skepticism could ever take away. The squad gathered one final time, exhausted but cohesive, and for the first time, their acknowledgement of her skill was visible. No words were necessary. Eyes met, subtle nods were exchanged, and a silent understanding passed between them. Emily Carter was not just capable, she was exemplary. She had led them without asking, taught them without speaking, and conquered every challenge without seeking approval. As she cleaned her rifle one last time, preparing her gear for the night, Emily allowed herself a quiet smile. She didn't celebrate loudly. She didn't demand recognition. Her triumph was internal, forged through discipline, perseverance, and relentless focus. Outside, the desert wind whispered against the compound, and the stars overhead seemed to shine a little brighter. Emily had arrived as a ghost, but she would leave as a force respected, acknowledged, and unforgettable. The training had tested her in every way imaginable: physical endurance, mental toughness, strategic thinking, and emotional control. She had met every challenge, exceeded every expectation, and in doing so, reshaped the squad, earned the respect of her instructors, and silenced every skeptic. She had proven beyond doubt that skill, discipline, and focus were stronger than prejudice, doubt, or dismissal. Emily Carter walked to the edge of the compound one last time that night, the rifle in her hands, the wind against her face, and the stars above. She had completed the journey from ignored outsider to legendary performer. The squad had witnessed her rise. The instructors had acknowledged her mastery. And Emily herself, quiet, calm, and composed, knew that she had not just survived, she had excelled, and in doing so, had become impossible to overlook.